Creating flowcharts and why flowcharts are so important. The flowcharts are all about the materials and methods section of your poster. You do not want to have a recipe, a written out recipe of step one of the project, step two of the experiment, and then you do this, and then you do this. You don't want just a recipe of what to do. You want a visual flowchart to catch the eye, catch the attention of the reader, and a visual representation of what your experiment is all about. And for some of you that are doing kind of algorithm and math and theoretical work, it's really difficult. I get it. It's hard to visually represent that in a way that's understandable, but that's the challenge of a poster, and you gotta try. There are two main ways to create these flowcharts: PowerPoint and Photoshop. Now, you don't have to be a Photoshop expert and you don't have to be a PowerPoint expert to do this. I actually have a poll that I want to ask right now just to get a feel for what your prior knowledge is with PowerPoint and Excel, because we're going to talk about Excel also in the next section. So let me go ahead and launch that poll now. Awesome. So on a scale of 1 to 5, how comfortable are you with using Excel to visually represent or present your data? 1, I've never done it before, have no idea how to do it. 5, I'm an Excel whiz. I even know how to do pivot tables, and I can visually represent any data set, no matter how complex it is. So if you could please answer that first question. The second question is, on a scale of 1 to 5, how comfortable are you using PowerPoint to create visual flowcharts and figures? Again, 1 being I've never done it before, 5 being I'm a PowerPoint whiz. I can create a flowchart for even the most complicated experimental design. So it looks like we're at 85% of survey responses. I'm going to go ahead and pause my recording right now. Awesome. Welcome back from that pause and recording. And here are our poll results. So it looks like 20% of you have never used Excel before, and so this is hopefully going to be a very helpful tutorial on the basic introductory level of how to use Excel to create visual representation of your data. There's another 25% of you are at a 2, so you kind of used Excel before, but not really. 35%, the largest group, is a 3, and then there's a couple of you that consider yourself a 4 level or higher expert in Excel. So as engineers, you will be analyzing data, and you will likely have to learn how to use Excel to do so. So this is, if you're a 4 or higher, or maybe even a 3, I apologize in advance if this is too simplistic. This is considered an introduction, basic intro level to how to use Excel. The second question was, how comfortable are you using PowerPoint? And it looks like we have more people that are a 3 or higher. So 40% have used PowerPoint and are more comfortable with it. There is 20% that have never used PowerPoint, and then another 15% that are only at level 2. So again, this is an introductory level use tutorial on how to use PowerPoint to create these visuals for your poster. So let's jump right in. So the first thing you need to know is PowerPoint has some built-in features in shapes and smart art. And here is a sample of something that we took this from an actual poster, and somebody created this whole visual using shapes and smart art on PowerPoint. So let's start with shapes. You can easily use shapes on PowerPoint. You just go to that shapes button on your PowerPoint bar, and then you click under insert, right? So you go to shapes, and then you can add a flowchart. And so you see there are different options here. You can right click on shapes and then say format shapes. And then you can start to format. You can do all sorts of things. So my advice, if you've never used this before, is just start clicking on stuff and see what it does, right? It's like you're playing with it for the first time. It's like a kid in the, in the toy store, right? You're just kind of testing stuff out. It's like, oh, what does this button do? Well, let's test it out. What do text options do? Transparency. And so obviously take a screenshot of the whole thing, but there's a little bar here that you can scroll down. There's a ton of different things that you can do with this. And as you can see, there are a ton of different shapes that you can use. And so, there's no way I can cover all of the different possibilities. I'm just showing you where it's at. And then it's a trial and error type thing, right? Where you go into PowerPoint and you start clicking on things and seeing what these different effects do. And pretty quickly, you're all engineers, you're all really good with, technology, and you like this kind of stuff. So I'm sure you'll have a really steep learning curve, and you'll quickly learn, what all these different buttons do. But this is just a starting point on where to get started with shapes. Now, for flowcharts, which is what we're asking you to do, if you look at the rubric, we're asking you to do a flowchart for your materials and methods section. So this is, again, another sample of a flowchart. We can clearly see that this figure A, in the materials and methods section is starting here, and we follow the arrows, right? Then it goes to here, then it goes to here, and then it goes down, and then it flows this way, and then it flows this way, and then it kind of goes up here to this section, and then it spreads out. There's 3 different options. It can go here, here, or here, and then if it goes to the middle, it ends up in these 2. Right? So clearly the eye, you can just visually see without understanding anything, no science, no technical terms, just seeing, okay, I'm going to flow in this direction. And these images really help my brain understand the complexity of how this research experiment worked. And then, of course, you have these labels that are critical, right? To say, okay, here's the label, here are some units. So I'm using 40, maybe milliliters. I don't know if it's liters. So again, the labels for the flowchart are critical. You have to include as much detail as possible in those labels, because then if I look at this, I'm already asking, is this 40 milliliters? That looks like a beaker that would be about milliliters. So I'm guessing it's milliliters. How these pipettes, like how small are these pipettes? What quantities are we looking at here, right? So the more detail labels you can include, the better. And yes, absolutely, this is going to be very time consuming. It's going to take forever to do your flow chart for your materials and methods. And that's why we're asking you to do this for draft 1 and 2 and not wait until week 6 when you're worried about your figures and your data. Take the time to do this now. Trust me, it will be worth your time. It will help your poster pop. It will help your poster explain your materials and methods section. And really help the reader and the audience who are looking at your poster understand the poster. Keep in mind that these posters are technically supposed to be standalone documents, right? It shouldn't require you to stand next to the poster and explain the visual. It should be self-sufficient. And that's how we're evaluating these posters, right? When we grade them, or not grade them, when we evaluate them for the best poster award, we're hoping that these are self-sufficient, right? We don't want to be asking ourselves, like, what is, why is this colored pink? And this is gray. Like, there's obviously, they did that for a reason. Is it clear to me why this is pink and this is gray? The color coding scheme is critical. And there should be labels, right? And keys to explain. If it's not really self-explanatory, there should be some kind of label or key explaining why things are the way they are. Okay, so you need a good flow chart, but you also need some really good labels. All right, so I want to transition now to Smart Art, which is another one of those drop-down buttons on your PowerPoint toolbar. Oops, sorry about that. So what you do with Smart Art is you click here, and there's different, as you can see here from the drop-down menu, you can do a process, you can do a cycle, you can do a relationship, you can do a matrix, you can do a pyramid, and you can also use pictures. So all of these are options. Now, each of you has a totally different experiment, totally different project. You're gonna have to decide which of these Smart Art flowcharts are best for your project, and only you can determine that. So again, as a content expert, I would rely on your DLS. That's a great question to ask your DLS. And obviously, the deeper your understanding of your project is, the better you'll be able to make this determination for yourself. But you're going to have to choose one of these kind of Smart Art flowchart options. And again, they all look different. So this is what a process one might look like. This is great for showing steps in experiments. So like that one example I showed you a couple slides ago, where you have an arrow that's leading from one box to another and then it flows. Cycle is great for a repeated experiment. So if you know that this keeps going over and over and over again and it just keeps iterating, then you probably want to use a cycle. And then a relationship is good for, when you have various components that all impact the results, here in a different way, right? And so you might want to use a relationship flow chart when you have various components that are impacting. And I like to use the keyword variable. Whenever you have an experiment protocol, there are variables that you're testing, right? You're not collecting an infinite amount of data. You're collecting data on very specific variables that you're trying to see how those variables impact the results, right? So if you're trying to speed something up, then time is one of your variables. If you're trying to optimize accuracy, then in some way you have a variable that's measuring the accuracy of what you're doing. So again, totally dependent on your experiment, totally dependent on your project. You need to identify those variables and then figure out how those variables are impacting your materials and methods, and how you're going to be collecting data to measure the effectiveness of those variables and how it impacts your hypothesis. So hopefully I've given you some background on how you can use PowerPoint to identify what is best for your experiment. Of course, you're going to customize and tailor this. I've already said this. Each experiment is totally different. You're going to have to figure out what's the best format for your project. And feel free to use colors and be creative, right? Like, this is an art, like it is an art form. This is a visual, art form, art product. And you're trying to take this very technical, dense, scientific experiment, this technical jargon, and you're trying to visually present it in an appealing way, in something that makes sense, in something that grandma can walk up to the poster, read it, and get the gist of what your project was all about. The poster is not going to create experts. The purpose of your poster is not to create a content expert. It's just basically to explain the basic understanding of what your project is and how it worked. So be creative. You don't feel like you have to be colorful if you're not a totally creative person. You don't have to go crazy with the color scheme. Really, what you want to be is neat, and you want to be consistent, right? One thing, I just actually had a meeting with them. Actually, it's 5 o'clock. I don't have time for that story. If you want to hear that story, I can tell you about this data presentation I just made to my boss, Dean Wessel and Dean Murthy, just last week. And they gave me some great feedback on how to display data. And, they talked about creating a, grammar, for your data, how you present your data when you train the audience that a certain color means a certain thing. So I can elaborate on that later. I just don't want to waste time because it's already